Welcome to Have You Not Read, a podcast seeking to answer questions from the text of Scripture for the honor of Christ and the edification of the saints. Before we dig into our topic, we humbly ask you to rate, review, and share the podcast. Thank you.
Welcome to Have You Not Read. I'm Michael Durham, and with me are
David Casson,
Ken Smith.
Tonight we have a special treat as we have an opportunity to interview one of our elders here at Sunnyside, who is a teacher at Christian Heritage Academy. And David, you had a great idea to interview Ken about what he does at CHA, the subject matter that he teaches, and why it's important for the youth of this era. So David, take it away.
Well, I have been asking Ken to come on the podcast for a while. And as you know, he is busy here at Sunnyside, busy at CHA. He is a husband, father, grandfather, has a very robust schedule as well, but was glad to finally get him here in the studio because this is a topic, especially as a father myself, and as every man in this room is, we worry about our kids, sending them out into the world. What you are doing at CHA with your kids is incredibly important, and I thought that it's something that that we could share with other parents. So, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself. You say you teach Bible, Apologetics, and Worldview at the high school level.
Yes, so I teach 11th and 12th grade Bible. 11th grade is Christian Worldview. So we look at biblical worldview, Christian worldview, and then analyze 5 other major worldviews through the lens of a biblical worldview. So we look at, in addition to Christianity, secularism, Marxism, postmodernism, new spirituality, and Islam. So, and then out of that, after we've looked at the worldviews generally, then we look at 10 different academic disciplines and how each worldview approaches that discipline. So theology, philosophy, psychology, economics, history, law, politics, so biology. So we go through all of those, looking at those through the lenses of those worldviews, how they look at those. So it takes a year to get through all of that. So we have a textbook from Summit Ministries called Understanding the Times that we use, and I supplement that with other stuff. So that's junior Bible. Senior Bible is first semester is Apologetics, and we can talk more about that. And then second semester for the seniors is Christian Living. So as they're getting ready to graduate, kind of helping them think through some of the things they're probably going to be confronted with as they head out away from the friendly confines of CHA and into the world. So trying to get them ready for some of those things and think about some of that.
Would you consider CHA a little bit of a bubble?
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Is that why this class that you've been, because I remember when the idea of some of these apologetics classes, and I know you were already teaching some worldview, were coming in, we and I talked about that a little bit, but it seemed that there was a need for these kids who had been steeped in some really good tradition. I mean, you're talking about Christian Heritage Academy. I mean, just Mr. Bullard, for example,
right?
A wonderful legacy, and they learned a lot about the biblical history of our country. But there's something was missing, and it seemed that they tasked you to fill that void. What was that void?
Well, it really kind of grew out of about, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, made the decision to kind of rework the scope and sequence of stuff in secondary Bible. So that's junior high and high school. So it was kind of, it was good, but there wasn't really a logical progression to it. So we reworked things. So 7th grade Bible now is an Old Testament overview, 8th grade is New Testament overview. 9th grade, first semester is study of hermeneutics, so biblical interpretation. Second semester of 9th grade is survey of church history. 10th grade is systematic theology. And then you already know what 11th and 12th grade are. So,
Wow.
So in reworking all of that and trying to have some logical progression to it, it was decided, apologetics, though they get some of that in their classes, it would be helpful to kind of focus on that as seniors. And so I had to think through, okay, how do we want to approach that? Where do we want to begin? So our whole approach is called the principle approach. So that begins with defining terms. How does the Bible look at your particular topic? So kind of walking through all of that and then trying to decide, okay, in apologetics, there's a lot of different directions you can go, a lot of different approaches you can take. So
Sure.
How are we going to do that? I don't know that I arrived at what is, perfect in any way. There's always room for improvement and refinement, and I'm always trying to do that and learn. But yeah, we look at, like, the first thing is, I think Hebrews 11:6 says, whoever comes to God must believe that he exists, and he rewards those who earnestly. So do you even believe that God exists? And what evidence is there for the existence of God? And again, there are different approaches to that. There's a presuppositional approach, there's evidential approach, there's classical apologetics, there's all of that. And I suppose my approach is kind of a blend of all of that to a certain degree. But we look at, what are some of the evidences for the existence of God? And so you look at the cosmological argument and the teleological argument and the ontological argument and all of that.
Which are part and parcel of the classical apologetics school, but they're well understood and helpful,
Right.
helpful arguments.
And then you weave into that evidential stuff. And so that's kind of where we go.
So your students, they start out with the foundation of just Scripture, Old Testament, New Testament. They go to hermeneutics, and now they've actually read, it's okay, this is kind of what it means. And then you start moving them into worldview, and you said that was the lens through which you view the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just living your life. You actually looked at individual disciplines, like you said, like law and politics and science, which is amazing. And I definitely want to talk about how your worldview affects those. But when you start talking about apologetics, what do you mean? If you want to define terms, what do you mean when you say apologetics?
Well, it comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to defend, to make a defense for. So I wrote down, the key verse that every apologetics book goes to, 1 Peter 3, verses 15 and 16, especially verse 15. So, but in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So, always being prepared to make a defense, but to do so with gentleness and respect. I think that's one of the key things I try to remind my students of. We live in a day and age where people defend all kinds of things. I mean, you don't have to go very far on the internet and find all kinds of voices trying to defend this, that, and the other. But most of the time, it's not with gentleness and respect. One of the things that I respect highly about Francis Schaeffer, the late Francis Schaeffer, was I've always considered him to be a gracious apologist. He stands for truth, but he understands that people are made in the image of God, and you treat them as such. So sometimes you're pretty direct, and you go through what he calls taking the roof off, to expose the fallacy of what they're thinking in a very clear and direct way. But even when you do that, you do it with respect. It's not to demean them, but sometimes people need to be shaken a little bit.
A little bit. There's some wonderful stories about Francis Schaeffer at his chalet, Le Brie, the place where he ministered to the intelligentsia of Europe. And I'm trying to remember who actually told this story, but they said, although his arguments are compelling, he's incredibly intelligent. That's not ultimately what convinced me. It was the love that he and his wife showed me and showed the people that came in there. They lived out Christian love and showed them Jesus, and then he was able to hear the arguments.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories about that was, and I can't remember where I read it, but someone made the comment that as many people were converted to Christ through Edith Schaeffer's cinnamon rolls as through Francis Schaeffer's lessons. So that's probably a little overstatement, but yeah, that
There's
makes the point of their care and concern for people as people. So
don't underestimate a good cinnamon roll.
yes.
Christian hospitality is the original evangelism strategy for the early church.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lesson. There's definitely a lesson in there.
Yeah. So all that to say, defining terms, apologetics has to do with defending the faith. There are a lot of verses that relate to that, but the 1 Peter one is the main one. I like the definition of apologetics, and I use this in my class from Doug Gruteis, who is a professor of apologetics at Denver Seminary, I think. I have a big honking book by him that's like 3 inches thick on apologetics. But he has this definition, which I think is really good. He says Christian apologetics is the rational defense of the Christian worldview as objectively true, rationally compelling, and existentially or subjectively engaging, which I think reflects that 1 Peter verse well, that truth is true whether I believe it or not. It's objectively true. So the focus on what is objectively true, and if it's true, then it needs to compel me to do something with it. It's not just what I know in my head, but what do I do with that? What does it call me to do? So it's rationally compelling, and then existentially or subjectively engaged. It makes a difference in my heart and in my life. Again, it's not just about the head, it's about the heart as well. And then that affects my hands and my heels, what I do in my life.
I mean, just admitting or starting from the premise that there is objective truth, that it can be even discovered. Is that something that your worldview junior students have to encounter, where there's the idea of, well, there's your truth. This woman is speaking her truth, and that truth ends up being, what is it called? Standpoint epistemology. I mean, this that truth is really from your perspective. Is that something that your students have already encountered?
Oh yeah. And so we talk about that all the time and try to bring in, illustrations of that. And so yeah, the whole idea, I mean, the whole postmodern worldview is rooted in that perspective of, truth. If it does exist, we can't really know it anyway. So all you really have is your own experience, your own feelings, and that becomes the basis for what is true.
Everything's a narrative. There is no meta-narrative. Everything's language-based, and that's all local definitions. There's no objective truth.
Except for the claim that is objective truth. I mean, that's what I keep telling my students, for postmodernism, it's all about being skeptical. And I say, postmodernism is basically skeptical skepticism. It's skeptical even of its own skepticism, and that's the truth.
I think I heard somebody once define postmodernism more as a mood.
Yeah, usually a depressing, pessimistic mood.
It's not so much you could say it's a worldview, but it's not a coherent worldview. It's more of like a mood. But so you have different types of conversations in apologetics. You have different types of people with different types of objections and concerns, obviously organically related to whatever worldview they're kind of operating with, whether they're aware of that worldview or not, whether they've examined it or not. Mm-hmm. So your blended approach in apologetics, classical, evidentiary, and presuppositional, makes sense, because when you get into a conversation with someone, you don't know where they're at. And so Colossians 4, again, another classic apologetics passage, Colossians 4, verse 5, walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer each one. Which is the wisdom we remember from Proverbs. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. And so if you're talking to somebody who is claiming that that the Christian worldview is illogical, classical apologetics is going to play a role in your conversation. If they're saying there's no proof, evidential apologetics is going to be helpful. If somebody is making arguments based on authority that they are imposing on you without them examining what that authority is, then your presuppositional is ready to go. So you have to have a blended approach.
Right. Yeah. That's a good analysis. I need to remember that.
We'll get you the recording.
Yeah.
Well, it seems that your students that are in your class, especially those who have come up through 7th and 8th and up through 12th, have a pretty solid foundation when they graduate. What role do you need or expect their parents to play as their students come up through these classes and then enter the 11th and 12th and start coming into kind of these capstone application kind of classes?
Well, my hope is that they talk with their parents about what we're talking about in class. You know, that like today, the juniors in Christian Worldview, we had a test over politics. And so looking at all of these different worldviews and how they approach politics, which is basically the exercise of power in governance. So I would hope that maybe they have their parents help them study for the test, you know, walk through their textbook with them, ask them questions. So I would hope that they do that. One of the other things that we do with 11th grade is we offer an honors credit for it. So in the honors part, I have a list of books, so they can choose from the list of books. There's one that's required, and then others that they can choose from. And they have to write a report on it. And then they have to talk with someone about the book. And a lot of times they will talk to a parent about the book that they've read. And those are always good conversations between kids and their parents about worldview issues. So anyway, I hope that happens, that, you know, they ask their parents questions, that when they see things on TV or hear something on a podcast, that raises questions, and yeah, that they talk to mom and dad first. I mean, I'm glad to answer questions, but I really want them to talk to their parents first.
Just as in any subject,
right?
You'd want the parents involved in their English class and their history class and their science class, everything. But in this one in particular, you know, your worldviews and your apologetics classes, we're actually engaging with media, actually engaging with politics, actually engaging with the social fabric around you. As they get ready to exit the home, it becomes even more important for them to, hey, mom, hey, dad, I heard this, and this is what I think. And based upon what I read in the Bible, this is what this means. Is that correct? That's a very good and healthy and almost expected conversation, something that you want these students to be doing.
Right. I mean, that's really part of the mission of CHA, is to assist the home. We're not there to replace the home. We're there to assist the home and the church in building a solid foundation in the life of every student. So yeah, my hope, my goal is that they would talk to parents first and foremost. Now, that doesn't always happen. You know, not every kid that comes to CHA comes from a solid Christian home. Really? And so, you know,
they just go there because it's a good private school, good high academics.
Right. And we do have some students that come in that situation. And truth be told, even those that do come from good, solid Christian homes, that doesn't guarantee that they really buy into what we're teaching. Seniors just took a test that every senior class has taken for like the last 20 years called the Pierce Worldview Test. So it's put out by the Nehemiah Institute, and it tests students in terms of their worldview thinking in politics, economics, education, religion, and society. So there's 70 statements that they have to respond to. And so it's interesting, the designers of the test break it down into 4 categories when you're done. If you score 70 or above, you get a biblical theist. You're in that category. If you're 30 to 69, you're moderate Christian. You may not agree with the wording of the categories, but you're in that category. Then the next category down, 30 to 0, I think, or something like that, is
Californian.
Well, no,
I'm sorry,
secular humanist. And then if you're below that, you're a socialist.
Wow.
So it was very interesting in this last group of seniors that took the test. So there's 52 seniors. I think we had 7 of the 52 that scored in the biblical theist category. But we had 12 that scored below 30. So in the secular humanist, or some even in the socialist category. So, and you never know on those tests. I mean, part of it could just be senioritis, and they're not even paying attention. They don't really care, and they're just marking stuff down. But you also have some that now they purposely chose to answer. So, yeah, just because we teach it doesn't mean that they take it. So,
right,
which is frustrating and saddening at the same time.
Is this a trend that you've seen over the years that's just been sliding that way, or is it kind of dropped off a cliff in the last couple of years?
Well, I think something this year that I noticed that I thought was kind of unique. Of the 12 students that scored, in the lower part of the test, 11 of the 12 were girls. And I was a little kind of taken aback by that.
Sure.
So talked to my daughter, who has a PhD in education. I said, this came out, it seems kind of odd to me. She said, well, no, not really. She said, girls tend to be on social media more and influenced by that more than guys. Guys do video games. I mean, they're online doing that sort of stuff, and they're doing maybe online gambling, but they're not necessarily buying into all the trends of social media. But girls are, and it's interesting, you go back and look at the categories, and yeah, to a person, I mean, they were really low on the social aspect, So it's interesting because there is sort of a disconnect. Many times they would score high in the religion part. So they know what the Bible says.
Right.
But there's a disconnect between that and actually applying it, believing it in these other areas. So, yeah, I'm not, on the one hand, I think we're teaching the right things and giving them the tools that they need. But at some point, they've got to take those for themselves as well. So that's the challenge in all of this, I think. And that's where parents play a really important role, is to check up on your kids, talk to them, ask them questions. What do you've been watching the news? Did you hear this? What do you think?
It should not be a surprise to a parent that their child believes this way. It says, oh, I had absolutely no idea. I sent them to this amazing Christian school, and they should have come out, minted in the appropriate box as a, strong Bible-believing Christian. You're from Oklahoma, for heaven's sakes, this. And what you're saying is that even with that training, it may not reach the heart, and parents really need to know where their kids are, not just what they say, but what they actually believe.
Right. And that comes from conversations. And families are extremely busy. And so I'm not always sure what level of conversations take place in homes. That has to be intentional. And so if there's not that intentionality, kids can fly under the radar. And, parents may spend the money to get them in the schools and all of that stuff, but if they never check up to see exactly what they're thinking and doing, they're missing the boat.
So, Ken, you've had 2 stints of teaching at CHA, and you had a gap of almost
10 years.
10
so
years.
I taught for 10, was gone for 10, and now I'm in my 9th year back.
Okay.
So.
Did you notice any difference between the kind of biblical literacy and worldview of the first 10 years versus these 9 years? Has there been a big shift as far as, it's a small anecdote just being CHA, but still, have you noticed some differences that have stood out to you at all?
I don't know that it's that significant, and it may just be because it is CHA. We are a pretty conservative and biblically focused school, and so people know when they send their kids there, they're going to get a healthy dose of biblical instruction, and there's going to be a big focus on that. So I don't know that there's been a huge difference in that. I can remember there was a class in my first 10 years that, I was ready to quit after that class. And there were some kids that came out of that class that have really gone off the rails. And I know that there have been those even since I've returned, 9 years ago, that have gone off the rails as well. So I don't know that there's a huge difference in that part of it. What I think is different is the influence of media, some social media, the accessibility to all of that, particularly through smartphones. I was just reading a couple of articles that I got just within the last couple of days from Summit Ministries about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and that they are considered, digital natives. They've never known a life without access to the internet. Most of them don't know what life is like without a smartphone.
Most of them can't write cursive.
Well, that's a whole different issue. But yes, we've had lots of discussions about that at school. So I don't know that it's a decline in biblical literacy among our students. Now that may be in the society as in general, but I don't think that's necessarily so with our students. But I do think that the influence and accessibility of digital information has had an impact. The school took some steps a couple of years ago to not allow students to keep their cell phones on them. So we lock them up in a phone jail every morning. So we have the little boxes in the first hour classes that they have to turn them in, and they're locked up and put away, and then they can get them when school is out. That was huge. Just in terms of students learning to talk to one another, look at each other in the eye, talk over lunch, talk when they're at their locker. They've got 5 minutes between periods, which isn't long, but they would run to their lockers, get on their phone to see, okay, what have I missed? Who have I gotten an email from? What's going on? And then they're off to class. So just that simple thing has helped, at least during the school day. Now, when school is out and they pick up their phone, you can see they're walking down the hall with their head down, looking at their phone. So the addiction is still there, but
sure,
we're trying to do what we can.
So just focusing on the students that do take this material to heart and have come up through the program, and it has obviously had a positive impact on them. These are, I call these near adults, and some of them are already 18. So what tools do they now have when they exit the class? And what tools would they not have if they hadn't had your class?
Well, I think for one thing, just the lessons that they've been taught in class about apologetics, about the reliability of Scripture, the evidences for the existence of God. In Christian living right now, we're just finishing up, almost done with a section on the church. Why is the church essential? Why do you need to be a member of a church? We took a look at just the trends of church membership and the decline of that. So trying to equip them to say, when you leave here, don't give in to the temptation to sleep in on Sunday. You need to be in the church. You need to be actively involved. You have something to contribute, and the church has something to contribute to you. The church is the bride of Christ. Christ died for the church. And so if you see the church as kind of optional, you're not understanding the role of the church biblically. And so, talking about things like that. So the lessons, I think, are important. The books that they read, exposure to all these arguments, like in 11th grade Bible, in Understanding the Times as their textbook. So getting a direct understanding of what exactly is Islam. What does Islam say about itself? And so there are quotes from the Quran, and they read exactly what the Quran says. Now, I'm sure Muslims would say, well, you're not reading it in Arabic, and that's you're not getting a true translation. Sure. Well, okay. I'm not going to debate that with you, but anyway, trying to let each worldview actually speak for itself in its own words, and then evaluate that. So I don't know that they would necessarily get that otherwise. And then to take all that back to Scripture. What does God say about all this? So trying to bring all that around. So I think that's valuable. If they do the honors stuff, they're reading some additional books that are helpful. In apologetics, I use the book, which I love it just for the title. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. So it's an older book. I mean, it was written in the early 2000s, but has some really good illustrations, good stories.
That was painful. It was an older book. It's an old book written in the early 2000s.
Yeah, well.
That hurt, man.
Yeah. Coming from an old guy, that doesn't seem that long ago. Anyway, so yeah, just the resources that they have to read, articles that we have them read. Some of the other teachers do some really good things in their classes where they have to do presentations and talk and stuff. That's a shortcoming of mine. I need to do a better job on that. I make them do a lot of reading and writing, which is also good. So things like that have helped them to think through on their own, wrestle with, be able to articulate it themselves.
Right.
So those are some of the things that I think school does well.
Have you had students that go on, let's say, to a, just a secular college, ever come back or ever talk to the parents, talk to you guys about some of the things that they have encountered at their college campus and says, I knew this was coming.
Yeah.
And even though it was stressful and even though it was a little awkward and uncomfortable, I was prepared.
Quite often. Yeah. It is funny when you get those, you're always grateful. You think that in the middle of it, you think, I'm not sure anybody's really listening at all. And then when they come back and say, when that came up in this class, I already knew something about that because we talked about that before, and I was prepared for whatever they were going to say. So it's always fun to get those kind of reports and parents that come back and say, thank you for what you taught. It really helped them handle this, that, or the other. And so it's always good when you get that. And I'm sure maybe there's more of it that we never hear about, which is fine. But when you do hear about it, that's a blessing too.
Yeah. I had the privilege of going to a high school level TPUSA event where they were engaging in civil discourse, where they were actually staging mock debates, where they had to defend a position, even one that they personally didn't hold themselves. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys, Stephen, who I like a lot, one of their first debates, it was on abortion, and he had to defend the pro-abortion side. And apparently he did such a good job that his girlfriend at the time got really upset with him and said, no, I didn't mean it, but he was actually putting up a reasonable defense. And it was interesting to listen to him, talk through that. But those kinds of debates, mock debates, forensic societies make you articulate a view and mount a defense.
Yeah. Yeah. So learning how to engage in rhetoric, to talk about it, and write, being able to reason and write is important. So we really try to emphasize all of that. So yeah, those are some of the tools they come out with that I think are really good for them in the long run. I mean, the school is a great school in terms of all the STEM stuff, math and science. We have a really great math and science department. But I'm very happy with our Bible department, and what we teach, how we teach it, the sequence of all that. So,
well, you have students that are in I went to military school, and it was a very controlled environment. And CHA, because it's small and you attract a certain demographic, can be a little bit more controlled. Mm-hmm. It doesn't surprise me, although it saddens me, that you have students who have gone through these programs, and you could tell it just did not touch their heart. It just didn't. So that's a little painful, but still, it seems to be an environment that you have a lot of control over. Some parents in our congregation, and some listening to this podcast, have to send their kids to public school. That is the reality. What advice can you give them? How could they augment the instruction of their kids? Because they're supposed to be teaching them at home. They're supposed to be doing family worship. But this is something that they could be also doing at home. What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, when we came to Oklahoma in 1997, it was for two reasons. One was for me to teach at CHA, and the other was for my kids to be at CHA. So my kids had been in public school all the way up to that point in time. So my oldest, Kyle, was coming in as a sophomore. Megan was going to be in 6th grade, I think, and Andy in 5th grade. And so we had, particularly with Kyle, we'd seen some things in public schools that, distressed us, we didn't agree with. We weren't in a place where a Christian school was an option. We didn't feel like homeschooling was anything we wanted to, dive into. So the Lord opened up an opportunity for me to come to CHA to teach. All that to say, if your kids are in public school, and I would say ask them questions, a lot of questions, almost a daily debrief. What happened at school today? What were you taught? What was said? Find out what's going on, so that you know how to counteract that if it's false, if it's deceitful, if it's going to undermine their faith, then you need to learn about it. And so the only way you're going to learn about it is to ask questions. They're probably not going to volunteer it unless it's just, way out there. Otherwise, they're just going to kind of go with the flow generally. So I think the biggest thing is to talk, ask questions.
Be involved.
Yeah, be in
aspect.
Sometimes I don't know if high schoolers, young folks are aware of what they're absorbing and just fitting into everything that they're already thinking. So sometimes they don't even know what happened that day. Well, how was class today? It was fine. It's like you can't get any. So sometimes it helps to put on a filter to sift through, and you kind of find out where a young person is. A classic question about future plans. What are you wanting to do next? The classic interview question: where do you see yourself in 5 years? But as they begin to pick up cues from their peers, as they begin to look at the models being put before them by social media, as they begin to formulate their expectations of the future based on how their teachers are framing values for them, then you begin to kind of get a feel for where they're at because of where they're aiming. And, so why do you think that? Why do you think you want to do that? Why do you think you want to go that direction? And you begin to get at what's going on in their value system. Where'd you get that idea? Why is that important?
Yeah, and the why question is a big question that doesn't get asked enough, probably. We're good about, wanting to know about facts, but yeah, why is always a good one to throw in the mix. Anyway, talk to them, ask questions. I expose them to good books. Some people have taken the route of, I will pay you so much for reading this book and writing a report on it. I was too cheap to ever do that, but but you might say, hey, let's read this book together and talk about it. That's a helpful thing. Or sit down, watch a video, listen to a podcast together. Help them find what's good. They don't always know what's good to read, to listen to watch. So help curate some of that stuff for them.
You could pay them to listen to our podcast.
That's true.
Yes.
That is true.
We could use some more sponsors. One of my favorite memories, and I've many, raising my daughter, but going through a book together, analyzing a movie that we saw, some video or something, or going to some event, and sitting down with her and says, okay, let's talk about this. And I get the eye roll and I'm like, all right, I know, Dad, here we go. And, I thought maybe it was kind of falling on deaf ears. And then she calls me from college and tells me that I ruined her. I was like, how did I ruin you? So every time a song or a book is mentioned in class, or somebody says something on TV, I'm analyzing it and it's your fault. And I was like, you're welcome. So, no, I actually appreciate that. Yeah. So she's come back and said that I've been able to arm her a little bit. She's just not taking stuff in. She's asking questions and trying to analyze them from that biblical worldview. And I really couldn't ask for too much more.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, why don't we pause here, if that's acceptable? And I have so many more things I want to ask you, but I think that's enough for right now. If that's okay.
Yeah,
great.
All right, let's go ahead and switch gears and recommend a few resources here. We've got to save some for part two. But as far as recommended resources, I'm going to let David, looks like you got a miniature stack over here. Do you have anything to recommend?
Well, this has been really helpful, not just in preparation for this episode, but something that I've referred to. This is written by C. Stephen Evans. He's out of Baylor. This is I can't remember which edition this is, but it's been reprinted. But it's the Pocket Dictionary of Apologetics and Philosophy of Religion. It is written from a Christian standpoint, but it has lots of those different terms in here. You're talking about everything from reductionism. What is omnipotence? What is justice, justification. What is the teleological argument, the ontological argument? What is classical apologetics or Reformed epistemology? It's like, I'm not exactly sure. And it talks about Sartre, it talks about Kant, and just these little snippets. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you can find it. Now you can Google or AI just about anything, but you're not exactly sure what worldview that's going to come from. This states it openly. So the Pocket Dictionary of Apologetics and Philosophy of Religion is it really is a pocket dictionary. It's about 6 inches tall and 3 inches across, something like that. You could just put this in your back pocket. And I found it to be really helpful when you're just like, what did I just read? Boom, pop that open.
Cool. Good. Ken, do you have some?
Oh gosh, I told you I brought a whole list, so I'm just looking at, okay, what one do I want to focus on? Understanding the Times, the textbook that we use with the 11th graders from Summit Ministries out of Manitou Springs, Colorado. They do a summer conference. It's a 2-week deal that they hold and offer, I don't know how many sessions of it, both in Colorado and some other places. So the textbook, the conferences, we've had students who have attended the conference and have been very blessed by that and helped by that. But if you can't do the conference, the book, Understanding the Times. In fact, they just revised it. I think a new edition comes out this fall. So they go through an update every, 10 years or so, which is good. So that would be one I would recommend really to anybody, but especially if you've got high school age kids, and they're not at CHA, this would be a great book for them to read.
Excellent. My recommendation for Worldview is going to be The Other Worldview by Peter Jones. And this is a book that will help you understand the difference between the number 1 and the number 2. And that's a very important concept to lay hold of. And it's going to be an excellent read. For background, I think I don't know if he quotes it in here, but C.S. Lewis once famously said that everything's broken down to either Christianity or Hinduism. And what he meant by that is you're either going to be seeing everything as integrally one essence of something, or there's actually a creator who is not his creation. And there's actually objectivity in the world. It's all subjective, or there's actually objectivity in the world. So this is a book that explores the impact of oneism versus twoism. So that's my recommendation. All right, what are we thankful for?
I am very thankful to my wife, Amy, who put together a farmhouse Airbnb for all of the families to come together in Maryland, because we were going to one of her cousin's weddings. To her cousin's wedding. One of her cousins was getting married. And everybody chipped in. There must have been 5 bedrooms, and we just packed people in, and some people were sleeping in the living room. And we got together every morning and we cooked and we had breakfast together, and people go out and do stuff. And some people would go out and come back, and then I would be able to chat with some people, and then you find yourself alone for 10 minutes, and then somebody else would come in. And it was just a flurry of activity. And then at night after dinner, we'd go out to the backyard. There was a big fire pit, and we'd all be around it. All our clothes smelled like campfires. But it was just this lovely family time. And the wedding was gorgeous, beautiful. It was small, it was intimate. And it was just a lovely joining of 2 people into a new family. And they did something I'd never seen before, where down the aisle, just next to the chairs as they were lined up, the bride and groom actually walked through pictures of grandparents, great-grandparents, and their parents on their wedding days. I'd never seen that before. And says, this is our legacy, and we're starting a new family, and we're continuing this legacy. I thought it was beautiful, beautiful picture of what it should be. So thankful to my wife for setting that up, and it just went off without a hitch.
All right. Thank you, David. What about you, Ken?
Oh, just to kind of piggyback off of David, I'm thought about this. I knew you were going to ask this question, so I am always grateful for my wife. I tell my students often about how blessed I am with my wife and how good God has been to me in her, and I'm just always amazed by her, all that she does, how she loves people well, but especially her family. She loves to have our family in as often as possible. So like Tuesday night, in the midst of, we're supposed to have all these massive storms, and this was the one night that we thought we could get everybody together, but then the storm thing came and everybody said, oh no, we'll be there. Okay, cool. So, we extend the table, bring in another table, get out full. And so we have, everybody around it and fix meatball sub sandwiches that Charlotte's gotten ready, and just sit around and talk and laugh and have a good time and talk about not serious things and talk about serious things. And it's just fun. And she puts all that together, and I'm always amazed at all that she does and how she loves people well, not just in our family, but in the church. She does a far better job of keeping in touch with people than I do. I really depend upon her to know what's going on a lot of times with people in the church, because she keeps up with all that way better than I. And so I'm just grateful for her.
Thank you, Ken. I am thankful for my uncle, my mother's older brother, my Uncle David. And I appreciate him because he's a busy man. A lot of people still depend on him, even though he's retired. He keeps on shooing off all the official requests to try to do his best to stay retired, though he's a very useful and dependable man. But he takes time out of his schedule to bless my family, and he took my middle four on another field trip. So he took them out to Weatherford today to the Aerospace Museum out in Weatherford, and they got to see all the different planes and cool artifacts and so on. And then he took them out to eat and took them by the Railroad Museum in El Reno on the way back. So they got a double field trip with Uncle David, and they were just absolutely thrilled. And so I'm thankful for him and his blessing of my children.
And that wraps it up for today. We are very thankful for our listeners and hope you will join us again as we meet to answer common questions and objections with Have You Not Read?